Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. Today we're going to be talking about landscape material, primarily mulch, stone, and some moss tips. And we spoke to Mossin Annie from mountainmoss.com, and she has some real nice tips. So landscaping around houses like we have now with beds where you have mulch or stone, you really didn't see much of that until the early 1900s when we started using lawnmowers. So before that, it was just really difficult to keep up a nice yard. So in fact, the first
So
U.S.
they didn't do anything?
They did very little. They used nature, man. So in U.S., it wasn't until 1868 where they had the patent for the first lawnmower, and it took a while before they got into mass production. So you're out, if you're trying to keep a nice front yard, you have to have your sickle and go after it, or you've got to have animals. In fact, they kept livestock in a lot of really nice homes. They would have livestock out front, keeping the grass short. Woodrow Wilson had a bunch of sheep grazing in the front lawn of the White House, and that's how they kept a really nice front lawn. And so in the typical home, you would have this hard-packed dirt or cobblestone going up to your front door. But on the side of that, what most homes had, if they were in a little neighborhood, was something called a cottage garden. So they would have this mix of beds on both sides of your walkway with ornamentals and edible plants and maybe a garden, but all this was in front, so it had a little bit of organization rather than just this weeds and mass overgrown grass. The modern approach to landscaping is using multiple beds around the house, around your patios and fences, and you're creating these nice visual borders, which makes it much easier to mow. And many of the landscape professionals now are suggesting to make your landscape beds at least 50% of your total yard space.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty interesting. But the more beds you have, the less mowing you're going to have to do, the less weed control, and especially depending on the part of the country you're in, you're going to have less water use because grass is just hungry for water.
Why don't you explain what a landscape bed is?
So generally around your house or an area that you're trying to make decorative, you're going to eliminate all the grass. You're going to have some type of border around this area, let's say either a plastic edging or stone, and then you're going to cover this area. Instead of grass, you're going to have either a mulch or a stone, and then you're going to plant decorative bushes or flowers in that area just so it's decorative. So it's more of a visual thing, and it really makes it nice, especially around the side of the house. You're not having to get a lawnmower or a weed trimmer up to your home, and so it just makes it easier to do your maintenance for your yard. But visually, it's just very attractive.
Do you have any tips for laying out a landscaping bed?
So to create a bed or expand what you already have existing, I would use rope and lay it out, or you can use garden hose and lay out your pattern. I would kind of make it a kind of a flowing shape rather than just hard rectangular shapes. You can kind of move it around, see what it looks like, see what appeals to you. And then I would either they have special spray paints that spray pointing straight down where you can kind of create that border, or you can buy a bag of flour and put a small hole in the end and then just follow your rope or hose and then move that away, and then you're going to use a spade to cut out the grass there. So one of the tricks with cutting out the grass is I like a border spade shovel, so it has just a flat square edge on it, and you would drive this straight down into the earth, only about 3 inches, and then in right behind that, you're going to make a second cut at a 45-degree angle. So you're going to cut out a wedge of grass, and then you're going to follow that pattern all the way around, cutting out this wedge. And then, what is nice for this is using a wheelbarrow. So as you cut this out, you're throwing it into the wheelbarrow, and then you would use a round, pointed, regular spade and then cut out the rest of the grass. So you're just really cutting off the roots. You're maybe angling down, going down about 3 or 4 inches, and just removing the grass and leaving, the dirt there. If you're thinking about picking up a new spade, we saw that earth talon at the garden show,
Right.
which was pretty cool. It has a special shaped tip where it almost looks like half of one side is taken away, and so it goes to a very narrow point. So it's very easy to drive this spade into hard packed soil. And then they were demoing it. They showed how you can use it to pull up weeds because the special shape it has. So that's kind of cool. And we actually did a video to show it off on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement on YouTube. Once you have your outline and your grass removed, you're going to want to edge this generally with either a plastic edging, brick, stone, or timber. If you're using plastic, I really like to use the plastic that has spikes to drive it and hold it into place. And especially if you're in the north part of the country where it has that freeze-thaw cycle, it is amazing how plastic edging will slowly work its way out over the years. And then they have some nice new sets for brick pavers where it's a plastic interlocking edging, and the brick pavers will actually lay into this frame.
Oh, that's nice.
And it holds it in place, and then you can pound in that plastic so that it doesn't move. If you're using stone or brick, they have some that are interlocking that do a nice job, and especially if you have a wavy pattern, they're designed where the edges are rounded, so they interlock, and you can really have a really nice design. If you're using timber, you want to make sure that you're getting pressure-treated lumber, and you want to make sure that it says it's rated for ground contact.
What do you mean by timber?
Timber, so wood. So if you have cedar or redwood.
Well, obviously, I know that it's wood.
So they have like 8 foot long, and some of them have two sides that are flat, so you can stack a couple of these on top of each other. And so they'll be maybe 2 or 3 inches thick, and they'll have a flat edge, and then you can drill holes through this to interlock them. But timber does a nice job. I mean, you can't make as nice a flowing shape for your
It's
bed.
probably just rectangles, huh?
Right, yes. And if you're using timber, you got to make sure that you have something to cut it with. So you're going to need a Sawzall or a circular saw or a really sharp handsaw. And then with timber, you're also going to want to most likely drill 1/2-inch holes through it, and you're going to drive stakes to hold them in place. Once you have your edging in place, now you're going to cover that bed with either stone or mulch. If you're using stone, you're going to want to use a heavy-duty landscape material, and this is going to keep the stone from pushing down into the earth and getting buried. It's going to kind of hold them in place, and then a landscape material is designed to allow moisture and oxygen to flow through there.
So this is if you plan on planting flowers in this area too?
Yes, because we need that moisture and oxygen and nutrients to be able to flow through this. You would never want to use a black plastic because it's going to kill the microorganisms, and you're not going to be able to get enough moisture down into the roots for whatever you're planting. There's some pros and cons for rocks. For warm climate, rocks are really nice because in the summer it's going to keep the ground a little cooler, reducing evaporation. In winter, the rock absorbs the radiant heat from the sun, and it actually helps keep the ground warmer. And then weed seeds have a real difficult time germinating in stone landscaping. It doesn't attract bugs, and it doesn't need constant replacement like a wood mulch does. And then it costs less in the long run because you're not adding to it all the time. But, one of the cons of having stone or rock is that initially it's much more expensive. Also, one of the cons are kids.
Throwing rocks?
Yeah. And then it's also harder to plant flowers and plants in stone because you've really got to move them and manipulate them. And then it can overheat some plants. Depending on where you are in the country, stone can actually overheat the roots for some plants.
Well, like my parents in front of their house have white marble stone.
Okay.
So it's a pretty decent size, landscaping bed.
Right.
So every couple of years they, want to add some more rocks to that area.
Okay.
The problem with the white marble is that it's
dirty.
white. So the stuff coming out of the bag, super duper white.
Right.
Stuff on the ground, which looks white on the ground, but
not so white.
It looks kind of gray when you put it next to the regular stone.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to make sure you spread it around and
absolutely.
you have enough to do a top coating. Why don't we talk about different types of rock? So there's 4 main types. I already talked about white marble.
So if you're at the home center or hardware store, they usually have a nice blend of pea gravel, river rock, your white marble, and then lava rock. Your pea gravel is the smallest, and there's going to be a wide variety of colors you can get. usually less expensive, and it can be moved much easier than the heavier rocks. So if you're planting shrubs later, and a lot of these garden beds or landscaping beds, if you're a new homeowner, I think it's nice that you can do this in a series of years.
Right.
So you can focus on one part of your house or the front of your house one year and slowly expand and work on each area, buying small plantings, small shrubs or flowers for each area. So pea gravel is nice because if you plan to plant in the future, it's easy to separate and put something down into the earth.
Right. I would be careful, though, because they do vary by manufacturer, like the color. If they have a sale at, one place, where you go, you buy 10 bags of it, and then the next year you're buying, the next year you're buying a different color. So just be aware.
Right. River rock is going to be larger than pea gravel, and what's interesting about this is these are real rocks that are drawn from riverbeds, and so they've been tumbled and pushed around by the river, so they're very smooth and really attractive looking. Again, a wide variety of colors you can pick up. The last main group are lava rock, and so this is made from actual volcanic rock, which is very interesting, and you'll usually see it in a burgundy color or a black.
Right.
It's very lightweight and easy to spread.
I think something that everybody struggles with is how many bags you need to buy when you're purchasing stone, and even with mulch.
Right.
So do you have any tips for that?
I think a great resource is landscapecalculator.com. Really simple website, and if you have stone or mulch, they have a bunch of different things, flower plantings. But for stone and mulch, you're going to plug in how many square feet you have, how deep you want it, and you're going to want it about 3 inches deep, and it's going to tell you based on the size of your bags how many bags you're going to need. So just a really nice tool.
Why don't we talk about wood mulch?
So wood is nice because it helps suppress weed growth. It's easy to lay out. Initially, it's much less expensive than stone. It's going to, as it breaks down, it slowly adds organic material to the soil, which helps the beneficial organisms in the soil. If you have a lot of plants in that bed, then it breaks down the nutrients so that those nutrients are available, easy for the plants to suck up. It retains moisture, it helps regulate the temperature of the soil, and it's much easier to plant things. And then perennials, it allows them to spread much easier than a stone landscaping.
Right.
Some of the cons are you need to add more mulch every couple years. In some areas of the country, it can actually attract and give insects an area to live and grow. And then the color fades. So there's a lot of the new products coming out now that have these 1 year guarantee for the color.
Right.
So it's nice to look at the packaging for that.
So in the tree episode, we talked about mulch, and we said 3-3-3.
Right.
Does that apply here?
So I would try to keep it around 3 inches also with any of the wood mulches, because anything deeper than 3 inches can actually start to mat down. It blocks air and moisture. What's funny is studies they've done found that if you get mulch too thick, the roots actually start coming toward the surface and working up into the mulch, and you want those roots deep rather than shallow. They found that about 3 inches is probably the perfect depth.
So I think we should talk about the price of mulch.
Okay.
So depending on where you're purchasing your mulch, there is a big difference. Around here, a lot of the gas stations carry, pallets and pallets of mulch.
Right.
And it's all 4 for $10. The hardware stores are generally, in home centers, are probably going to be a little more expensive. The problem is you're not comparing apples to apples. You're comparing a lot of these gas stations, they carry a 1.8 bag.
Right, so it's smaller than something you'd find at a home center.
And so, you're getting it cheaper, but you're going to have to purchase. So if you were always used to purchasing it at the, your home center,
right,
and okay, it always takes 12 bags to do this area. Now all of a sudden you buy your 4 for $10 and it doesn't do what it's supposed to do.
Right. What's interesting is manufacturers actually make it for a lot of these companies. They'll make a special bag that hardware stores and home centers don't get or can't get. So it's very interesting. So you really need to look at the size when you're buying it.
And then factoring that into your cost too.
Right.
Of how much you're going to use and where you're going to put it down.
And then for price, shredded bark is going to be the least expensive. It's probably the most common that you'll find. So it's like
your cypress mulch?
Right. And then the nuggets, like a pine bark nugget or any of the nuggets, they're bigger. They're going to last longer. They don't degrade as quickly.
Right.
So that's a couple other factors to consider when you're putting it down. And then I would never use the rubber mulches. And even though they look pretty cool, I mean, they're shredded, they look like pieces of wood. Mm-hmm. But the problem is they can really, again, depending on the part of the country you're at, they can overheat the roots and damage your plants in these beds.
Well, I would say if you're going to use it in a play area for your kids,
that would be great.
So you have a swing set, you know, all that kind of stuff.
And then they just bounce right back up. That's cool.
That's where you should use rubber mulch.
And videotape it. In some parts of the country, for vegetable gardens and especially for strawberries, they recommend using straw as your bedding.
Well, that's crazy.
But you have to be careful because it blows away easy. It's really not that attractive, and it's highly flammable. so you just have to be careful with that.
Do you have any suggestions for how to prevent weeds or control weeds in your landscaping area?
So there's a few highly rated products for landscape area. One is Dr. Earth. Mm-hmm. We met them at the garden show. And they have a product called Final Stop Weed and Grass Herbicide. And this is all essential oils that they use. So they're using cinnamon oil, clove, soybean, rosemary. They blend all this together so they kills crabgrass, broadleaf weeds, and grass. And you're not using any toxic chemicals.
That's good.
So that's pretty cool. Ortho has a product called Grass Be Gone. So it's grass-b-gon, and this kills all of your weeds in your landscape area, but it's gentle on the landscape plants. But I would still use a piece of cardboard to block any overspray.
So this is basically any chemical that you're using, right?
I would, yeah. You know, why stress out your plants and get, you know, the overspray of these chemicals on the plants that you're trying to keep healthy? Bear Advanced has their natural line called Natria, and they have a grass and weed killer. It just uses herbicidal soap, and it's designed so if you're using it next to your house, it's not going to stain brick or concrete or asphalt. Preen has a bunch of products for landscape areas, and these are designed to keep new weed seeds from growing. So with Preen, you've got to pull all the existing weeds, then you'd put down this product, water it in, and it's going to keep new weed seeds from growing. Jonathan Green has a product called Organic Weed Control, and this is 100% corn gluten meal. So this will actually stop weed seeds from germinating, and it's a slow-release fertilizer for about 3 months, and it's also very healthy for the microorganisms in the soil, so that's a nice one. Now, for areas around your house where you have a hard time growing grass or flowers because it has very little light, you can grow moss, and some of them are just beautiful. So a landscape bed, rather than using stone or mulch, you can grow moss in that area so it looks green. There's a lot of different texture and colors. And so we talked to Mossin Annie, and we'll hear a few tips from her.
Annie, how you doing?
Good afternoon, JC. I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. Cindy and I were talking about moss this week, and we were curious if you could share a few tips on the best type of moss to pick, the easiest to grow for a homeowner, and then maybe a couple tips on how to prepare the soil and care for it.
Okie doke. Well, mosses provide year-round green, and you can plant them in any zone in the United States. In fact, in the world, because mosses have the ability to withstand sub-freezing temperatures. In fact, they even continue growth and reproductive stages when they are exposed to cold weather.
Wow, interesting.
So with that in mind, we don't have the restriction of planting zones.
Okay.
The next thing to consider would be the microclimate of the environment where you intend to plant the mosses before you choose your species, because sun exposure is a primary factor in terms of right moss, right place. You know, that right place, right plant idea, it applies to mosses too. We have an amazing number of species available to us, and there are certain mosses that you would choose specifically for shade locations, which is what most people naturally assume is where mosses grow.
Sure.
But there are also other species that like partial sun, don't mind it a little bit, and there are even certain sun species that I just call sun lovers because they don't even want to be in the shade. They can live in the highest heat index imaginable.
Really interesting.
So there's several that I would recommend based on different applications, whether you wanted to plant in your landscape directly on soil, whether you wanted to do a patio or a pathway with stones or bricks, or maybe even decorate and enhance a wall to give it that instant antiquity that so many people desire from the moss appeal. With that in mind, you look at the leaf canopy, you assess the humidity, you look at reflective light, and then you choose whether you're going to have a shade species or one that's partial shade sun or a direct sun. If you want just shade, I would recommend Thuidium, which is a delicate fern moss that grows sideways. You might also choose Atricum undulatum. I have to give it its second name because there's another Atricum that likes living in the sun. But the undulatum is a great one along with the Thuidium for faster growth and for a variety of planting methods that will lead to long-term success.
Okay.
Both could be applicable even for a moss lawn. Another species that is my very favorite is Climacium, and it has sideways rhizoids with an upright growth. And it looks like little trees, and it goes through variations from being a deep emerald green to a medium green to an olive green to this dead brown withered stage that you are convinced it has croaked. And then, to your surprise, a little bright green growth will come out of the stem, out of a leaf. It is one of the absolute best species for using the fragmentation planting method. It's also a great solution for any super soggy area. I use it for remediation and mitigation of stormwater runoff or places like that are kind of boggy. But it can tolerate shade or sun. It's just incredible. So that will move a little bit further over into the spectrum of sun mosses. And in particular, Ceratodon looks like velvet. Just this incredible, deep emerald color. And it is so soft to the touch. So mosses not only have visual appeal, but they have tactile appeal. So don't forget to touch them and to take your shoes off and walk on them.
Oh, really? They can stand up to being walked on?
Yes, in fact, that's part of my planting technique. So let's assume that you've already assessed your environment, you've chosen an appropriate species, and you're ready to plant. All you have to do is clear debris. Just pick up sticks and leaves and acorns and get it to a hard-packed surface. You don't need to do any tilling of the soil, no need for supplements at all, because mosses don't derive their nutrition from roots. You didn't interrupt me when I said rhizoids. But I thought you should have, because that's an important point about mosses. They don't have roots. They just have these little rhizoids which grow on the surface of the soil if they're sideways growers, or they will grow straight down if they're an upright grower. However, they don't serve any purpose beyond just holding them to the soil or whatever substrate. Mosses feed through their leaves. They drink rainwater or supplemental water, and tap water doesn't matter. It's okay too, y'all. I'll just tell you that right now. You can worry all you want to about it, but it's going to be okay. And if your water isn't good enough to drink, I suggest you go ahead and put it on a filter, because the mosses can tolerate all kinds of substandard conditions, even the most inferior of all soils. So
that's great.
That's why I say you do not need to add any type of fertilizers or supplemental soil. You can just use fill dirt if you're actually bringing in new soil.
Well, it sounds like almost the perfect plant to use as an accent for your landscaping.
Well, I guess that's one perspective. You could use it as your main plant and those other vascular ones as accents.
There you go.
That's what my yard is. I have it is entirely mosses with 35, maybe 50 species at the moment.
And as far as like just caring for it, let's say we've put down our moss, we have it in our landscaping area, and now we want to care for it. What would be a couple key things that we should be thinking about throughout the season?
Water and walk on it.
Really?
Water and walk on it. And I guess I could say it another time, but I won't. That is part of your planting method, whether you use the interleafing of the edges of colonies, or you can use fragmentation methods. Even then, if you tear the fragments apart or cut them with scissors and distribute them across the soil, then you water them. And what are you going to do next, JC?
You're going to get your socks off and walk on them.
Well, yeah, you can walk on them in your boots if you want to. You can just don't wear big clodhopper boots. No, you need to have flat soles. That's better.
Is there an amount of water that we're looking for per week or per month?
Oh, my goodness. No, we're talking per day, several times a day. They take little tiny drinks, but they do not need long drenching soak. Because they drink and eat through their leaves, and the leaves are only one cell layer thick, they hydrate very quickly, but they can also dry out quickly. So I recommend several times a day, but only do it for like a minute to no more than 4 minutes.
Interesting. So besides misting, Annie, what's the other maintenance we have to think about with moss?
Well, you don't have to mist. You can just use an overhead oscillating sprinkler on its normal setting. And you don't have to have a fancy irrigation system, although I do recommend that you might put it on an automated timer that you can get that's battery operated. Now, you will have some other maintenance activities, though, throughout the year. You would continue your debris pickup, and, of course, during leaf season, you'll have to deal with them. Mosses should be attached well enough that you can power blow them away.
Okay, so a leaf blower just to keep the
leaves off. A leaf blower will work fine. Do not rake them because you will not have a light enough touch to be able to do it without dislodging the colony. And occasionally when you're blowing, they might dislodge, and it's easy to repair any kind of problems. But blow when the leaves are wet, not dry. The other thing is pick up that debris, get rid of any acorns or little branches that fall down after a storm. And regrettably, I will have to say, there are some moss gardeners that swear they don't have to deal with weeds, but I've been doing it for many, many years, and I'm still dealing with little tiny weeds.
Okay.
So just be prepared that you may have to address that issue in one way or another.
Annie, if I wanted to find out more about your information and your site, where would I go?
You would go visit mountainmoss.com. And I have a lot of information about mosses, how to grow them, garden with them, and be successful at it. I'm very adamant about responsible land stewardship, and I actually cultivate mosses that have been rescued from high-impact places. And I have a mossery, JC.
Okay. So I can buy moss from you.
You can in container trays, or I have pre-vegetated mats that roll out like an instant green carpet, as well as living walls that have already been cultivated so that you can hang them vertically now.
Wow.
You don't have to wait for it to happen.
And you're also putting together a book, or you're putting out a book soon?
Oh, yes. It's put together. Now it's in print production, and it's a very exciting process, I must say. It's going to be published in August of this year, 2015, by Timber Press, and it's entitled The Magical World of Moss Gardening.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much for having me today. And
all right, Andy, it was a pleasure.
Go green with moss.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
I think moss is a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I do too. We saw a couple of the growers at the garden show, and I was really impressed with the look of it.
So my parents, they live on a hill, so their backyard it doesn't get a lot of sunlight. They have a bunch of trees back there, so behind the shed it's just like a bunch of mush.
Okay.
And so they've tried growing grass back there. They've tried, laying it out with mulch, but over time it doesn't really look good.
Right.
So I think we should do a video on moss. We could plant a bunch of moss back there.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to work with it. And one thing that Annie told me after we were talking, she said it's nice because moss very seldom needs herbicides or pesticides. Mm-hmm. In her experience, she's found that good bugs like it and bad bugs don't. So I thought that was interesting.
So you ready to wrap this up?
I am. You can subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher Radio.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe there as well.
If you'd like to email us, you can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week. Deep